This is
Make it plain.
Make it plain.
MIP
With Masamela Matfumo.
Mark Thompson.
Make it plain.
Get woke.
Well, it's the beginning of the month, so to speak. And as always, we check in with our dear friend, the chief economist at the Center on Budget, to talk about the previous month's job numbers. And here to do that, once again, is chief economist, centeronbudget.org, Chad Stone. Hey, buddy, how are you?
I'm well. How are you, Mark?
Just fine, just fine. We were just talking before the show about his hometown team, the Phillies, or his close to hometown team. Considering all the sabermetrics and the fact you're economist, maybe they ought to consider you to be the manager.
Yeah, maybe a while ago.
Deal with numbers.
Do deal with numbers.
And you could see.
Don't deal with motivating hitters to hit and pitchers to pitch.
But you could hire me to be your bench coach. We'd have a ball.
There you go.
You know?
We got it.
And it'd be paradise. Sort of our vocation in retirement, so to speak. Chad's tweet thread is available at ChadCBPP, and we usually do a deep dive into that. You approached things a little bit different this month, though, Chad, didn't you?
Yes, we did. We thought it was time to take a look back and reflect on how well the economy's actually done in the last 2 years, especially compared with the Great Recession recovery, which was much more sluggish. And one of the reasons we did that is that we've noticed that the popular narrative out there is that it doesn't agree with the facts. The popular narrative is that the economy is in terrible shape, nothing good's been happening. All the focus is on inflation, and forgetting the fact that the job recovery has been really strong, that policy was a major contributor to that. And so we thought we would focus on that a little bit more in this month's jobs report. Now, another thing is that yesterday, all of the experts were thinking this was going to be a really bad jobs report because the company ADP, which processes a large number of payrolls in this country, also has a sort of think tank attached that does an estimate of employment ahead of the Bureau of Labor Statistics official numbers. And their number for May was 122,000 jobs, and the consensus estimate was 300,000 jobs, but some of those people, as soon as ADP came out, lowered their estimates to 200,000 or something like that. And so when we got 390,000 today, that was a pleasant surprise. Now, ADP doesn't do a perfect job. There's a lot of statistical. It's just there's differences, but and theirs is just private, but that's where all the job growth was anyway. So in any case, the notion that people have a sort of fundamental misunderstanding of how well the economy is done, and we were prepared to discuss why the jobs report might have been a little bit more disappointing than in the past, but it really wasn't. It was in line with, although a little bit lower than other jobs reports this week, and that's pretty amazing given how far we are into the recovery. So I have a couple of comparisons to the Great Recession that are pretty dramatic.
No, you do. And I'm going to get that before that, though, because you're right. ADP does cover a lot in terms of payroll. Why were they so off? What was their rationale?
Well, they don't do postmortems. They acknowledge that they're. I mean, they try to follow the same procedure, but with a sample that's drawn from their anonymous records of employees of the companies that they serve, and they apply statistical techniques to adjust that sample to look like the population. Bureau of Labor Statistics does the same thing. Their survey of establishments is a couple 100,000 people, and not the whole universe. And they do some adjustments as well. So there's some statistical error, sampling error in there, but this time it just happened to be pretty big across the two.
Bigger than usual. And you're right. What Chad does in his tweet thread, folks, so well is compare the COVID economic recovery to the recovery from the Great Recession. He is doing in his tweet thread a better job of drawing that distinction than even the White House is. Because this has been a pretty meaningful recovery, a very good one, a very on-time one, well-paced one. You're right, but all of the media coverage has been doom and gloom. Your analysis says not quite.
Not quite. So, as we said, 390,000 jobs added in May. So payroll employment is now, I'll say just 882,000 below where it was in February 2020. It was millions and millions below in the depths of the recession. 882,000 is still a pretty big number, but 2 months of almost 400,000 jobs gets you just about there. Now, we still have to catch up to the path that we would have been on in the absence of the pandemic, when employment would have been growing continuously over that whole period. But that's really a substantial improvement, and it's even more dramatic when you compare it to where we were 25. So we're 25 months in to the recovery, and if we compare it to where the Great Recession recovery was, that same number of months in, the gap then between the payroll, the level of payroll employment in that month and what it was prior to what it was prior to the recession, it was 6.4 million was the gap in the Great Recession.
Wow.
On a comparable kind of basis. And the unemployment rate this month was 3.6%, same as it was last month, a tenth of a point higher than it was at the start of the recession, pre-pandemic, just before the recession, and two tenths of a point higher than the lowest it's been in my history as an economist, which goes back to the late 1960s, when it was 3.4%. So it's a really low unemployment rate. And the unemployment rate was 9% at the same point in the Great Recession recovery.
Yeah, or just a little less than triple.
Yeah.
At this same time. So that is important. Another thing that's very important, you write, strong demand for labor has benefited many workers in low-paid jobs with wage gains greater than inflation over the last 12 months. Wait a minute, that can't be true. All we're hearing about is inflation. You mean to tell me that there have been gains in wages that are actually greater than inflation over the past 12 months?
For some workers.
Okay.
On average, the average hourly earnings that gets reported every month in the jobs report grew about average hourly earnings grew about 5.4% over the period. So that's below what the inflation was in the period. However, low wage workers in industries that pay low wages have finally benefited from wage growth because the labor market for their services is so tight. And so there are industries that pay low wages that the average wage gains over the last 12 months were in excess of that 8.3% inflation rate last month. So it's a reverse of what we've been thinking about in inequality discussions for a long time. Now, that's not to say that they're doing super great, but they're doing much better than inflation. Their wages are still low compared with folks in the middle and folks higher, but they have grown substantially and ahead of inflation over the past 12 months, and actually over longer periods than that. And for the first time in a very long time, because the wages at the bottom were pretty stagnant for quite a long time.
And you would attribute this recovery being quicker and were actually happening at a faster pace than the Great Recession recovery because of policy decisions, correct?
Policies played a pretty important role. It's not the only thing. The pandemic economy is a different kind of economy and so forth. But the policy differences are pretty stark. We had a big Recovery and Reinvestment, American Recovery and Reinvestment Act in 2009 that was as big as the Obama administration thought they could get through Congress, and they got it through Congress. And it kept the Great Recession, the worst of the Great Recession, from being even worse than it was. And that's to their credit. But there wasn't any significant follow-up after that. And so the economy recovered very slowly because it didn't get additional help from and additional relief for folks in the same way that the policies this time around provided support to people and support to the economy that generated a much faster turnaround.
That's very important, obviously. And again, as you alluded to, not focused on as much as the bad news. There is inflation, there are financial difficulties, but as you have pointed out to us over these months, and as we have talked about, part of that is the setback of having certain riches. There has been such a quick recovery. So where supply and demand don't meet, so some of these prices go up. So you really have to ask, what would people prefer? A slow recovery with less inflation, or this fast recovery where everybody's getting back to work with inflation? I mean, I don't think anybody likes inflation, though. Most people would probably try to come up with another scenario that didn't include inflation at all. I know that. but
right.
But at least there are some jobs coming back, people getting back to work. And I've even heard how with the wage piece, the attitude that some had, the people have changed. There's even this thing that they call the Great Resignation. But if that is a real thing, then you also have a situation where the behavior of some workers is probably helping to lead to, a negotiating position to get more wages. You want us to come back to work? You want us to go back? You want everybody to come back to normal? You got to do a little bit better than you did before this happened, one. And we don't necessarily have a need. And some employers are already in front on this. There's no need for us to show up at a brick and mortar location 5 days a week, if at all. So that's the other thing that's probably helping give workers some leverage and some incentive to go back, right?
Yeah, except that remember we're talking about labor and hospitality jobs to a large degree that require face-to-face communication, and that's those industries, accommodations, hotels, and food service and drinking places. I think they call them bars. There's no work at home in those, and so to get the workers that they need, they've had to give a better wage. So the Great Resignation was not really a resignation; it was people quitting their jobs to take a better job. It wasn't people dropping out of the labor force. There was thought about early retirement, but if you look at what's happened in the population age 25 to 64, that the labor force participation rate among those people is back to where it was before the pandemic. So they didn't really retire. Maybe they dropped out for a while, or they looked harder for a job because they knew they could get a better job. But a lot of that seems to have worked itself out, and so that's still there's demand for workers, for those workers, and that's what's pulling their wages up.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's also pulling them back into the labor force if they had left.
Yeah. And that is definitely good news. Chad's tweet thread available, as we said, for Chad CBPP. We always like to check in on the unemployment based upon race. Unemployment for the African American community is just above the rate in February 2020.
Yeah, it's above 6%.
Right.
But in fact, all of so we have data for the 16 and over the whole population by race and ethnicity: Black, Hispanic or Latino, Asian, and white, and all of them are back close to where they were.
Right.
Last month, the Black unemployment rate was actually 0.2 of a point lower and was below where it was in February 2020. But it's a somewhat volatile series. But the numbers jump around a little bit from month to month. But all in all, compare with where we were in the recession. These are really good outcomes. But then we get to the other aspect of those outcomes, which is Black and Latino rates are substantially higher than white rates, even when the economy is close to full employment. Now, that's a problem that macroeconomic policy can't really solve. You can get the unemployment rate down, but you can't do it differentially, particularly because it's a structural problem, and you have to address the root causes. And so there's two charts in this tweet thread. One of them is looking at the rate, the current rate and the rate just before the recession for those four groups. And the other one is looking at the long history of Black and Hispanic unemployment rates compared with white unemployment rates. And it's just throughout the period through which we've had data for all three, the Black rate has been roughly twice the white rate. When the economy is really strong, the Black rate comes down. But I've said this before, that in the longer time series, the Black rate in the best of times is little better than the white rate in the worst of times. That's how big a disparity. That's the two
right.
Twice as high. No matter what the level, the Black rate's likely to be twice as high.
That's right, folks. It stays there. Somebody's got to figure that out at some point. Folks, we invite you to read Chad's latest tweet thread at Chad CBPP for Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. Also read his latest writings at centeronbudget.org. Always useful information. And we'll have him back again, as always, first of next month, if he is not hired to be the manager of the Phillies.
Let me say something. We're in the process of putting together a new version of a chart book that we've had for a while that will have several of the charts you're interested in, and we're hoping to get that out at the beginning of next week.
Always with the best charts too. Always with the best charts too. So be on the lookout for that, folks. Centeronbudget.org. Chad CBPP on Twitter. Thank you, Chad.
You're welcome.
Thanks for getting woke and listening to Make It Plain. As always, perform an act of kindness on behalf of an elder or young person. Write a letter to a sister or brother who just so happens to find her or himself incarcerated. Offer libations to the ancestors upon whose sturdy shoulders we all now stand. And above all, give thanks to the God of your understanding by whatever name you call her and him. All God asks of us is that we give each other love. Thanks for giving MIP love. And please remember to subscribe and give us a 5-star rating. If all hearts and minds are clear, it has been made plain.